Hey there, and thanks so much for joining me today. I'm Michael Davis, and what I'm about to share is a story that stayed with me, etched into my memory like it happened yesterday. At the age of 65, I made a bold choice to open my heart again and meet someone new. I wasn't looking for a fairy tale, just a kind soul to walk with through this next chapter of life. But what began as a hopeful encounter took a turn into one of the strangest experiences I've ever lived through. A little backstory: after 33 years as a high school math teacher, I retired 5 years ago. These days, I enjoy a peaceful life in my two-bedroom condo under the Florida sun. My only daughter, Sarah, lives all the way in New York, and my wife passed away 3 years ago. Since then, life has been quiet, yes, but also deeply lonely. I've kept myself busy, gardening, flipping through old novels, even volunteering at the local library. Still, there was this subtle ache, like something was missing. That's when I realized I wasn't searching for love exactly, but for connection. Someone to laugh with, to share stories and quiet mornings. One afternoon, my neighbor Linda, who helps organize events in our community, suggested I meet Christine, a retired nurse just a few blocks over. According to Linda, Christine was also hoping to find someone special. With her gentle nudge, I decided to take a chance. After a short and pleasant phone call, Christine and I agreed to meet for coffee at a nearby cafe. As the day drew near, nerves kicked in harder than I expected. It had been decades since I'd dated, if you could even call it that. That morning, I rifled through my closet not once but twice, eventually settling on a crisp white shirt and an old blazer that still had a bit of charm. I arrived 15 minutes early, picked a cozy seat by the window, ordered a cappuccino, and waited, my heart thumping with equal parts hope and hesitation. Christine walked in right on time, radiating a quiet confidence. She was dressed in a soft blue blouse that complemented her silver earrings, and she carried herself with grace. The moment she smiled, I felt my nerves start to settle. As she approached, I stood up to greet her, and we exchanged a few polite words before taking our seats. The conversation began with ease. Christine spoke warmly about her decades working as a nurse and how retirement had been both a relief and a bit of an adjustment. She talked about her son, now living in Chicago, and her love of cooking meals from scratch, especially on quiet Sunday evenings. I shared stories from my teaching years, spoke proudly of my daughter Sarah in New York, and even chuckled about my ever-growing collection of tomato plants. There was a natural rhythm between us, like two people who understood the comfort of quiet moments and the struggle of transitioning from a full career to a more solitary lifestyle. For a while, everything just clicked. I felt myself letting go of the tension I'd been carrying. But then something shifted. Christine leaned in a little closer, her smile softening into something more reflective. Her voice lowered slightly, more deliberate now. She began by thanking me for being so open. That honesty, she said, was something she truly valued. Then came a pause, and her expression changed. She said there were a few things, four to be exact, that she needed in any future relationship. At first, I admired her directness. It's rare to meet someone who doesn't dance around expectations. Clear communication is everything, right? But then came the first condition, and that's where things took a turn. Christine suggested we try living together for a 6-month trial period. It was bold, sure, but I could see the logic. Sharing space could reveal compatibility more quickly than endless coffee dates. I nodded politely, trying to stay open-minded. And then, she moved on to the second condition. And that's when things started to get really strange. To take the next step in this trial, Christine said she had a requirement, one that instantly shifted the entire mood of our conversation. She calmly explained that she'd need me to deposit $20,000 into a shared account. She called it a commitment deposit, a gesture, she said, to show I was genuinely invested in building something real with her. If things didn't work out, she assured me, a portion of the money would be refunded, prorated based on the time we lived together. As she laid it all out, clearly and without hesitation, I felt a mix of emotions wash over me: surprise, confusion, and an undercurrent of quiet disappointment. $20,000. It wasn't just the amount. Though, let's be honest, that's no small chunk of change. What unsettled me was the meaning behind it. The idea that commitment, trust, or sincerity could be measured in dollars made my chest tighten. It felt less like the beginning of a partnership and more like the opening terms of a contract. I kept my face composed, but inside my thoughts were sprinting in every direction. Part of me wanted to ask outright, "Are you serious?" But I didn't want to sound harsh or shut her down without understanding her fully. So I stayed quiet and listened. Maybe I thought she'd been through something painful. Maybe this was her way of protecting herself, of ensuring no one wasted her time or took advantage of her kindness. But no matter how I turned it around in my mind, it just didn't feel right. At this stage in life, I believe love, companionship, should be rooted in something deeper than financial terms, in trust, in shared values, in the simple joy of discovering someone new, one conversation at a time. Instead, this felt transactional, cold, like the spark we had earlier had been replaced with a business pitch. And as I sat there nodding politely, I realized this was not the kind of relationship I had hoped for when I stepped back into the world of dating. As Christine continued sharing her rationale, I sat there, quietly trying to make sense of it all. Maybe, just maybe, this commitment deposit was her way of protecting herself. Perhaps someone in her past had left deep emotional or even financial wounds. Maybe this was her armor, her safeguard against history repeating itself. I wanted to understand. I really did. But even with that context, something inside me felt off. The issue wasn't just the money, it was what that money symbolized. Starting something as delicate and meaningful as a relationship with a financial clause felt wrong. To me, trust is something that grows slowly, nurtured by honesty and shared experiences, not something you prove with a wire transfer. What did it say about her view of love, of companionship, if sincerity had to be backed by a dollar amount? I continued listening, reminding myself of the promise I'd made to approach this new chapter of life with an open heart. But despite that effort, my mind kept circling back to the same uneasy thought. Relationships, especially later in life, should be about mutual comfort, not contractual terms. Still, I said nothing. I let her finish her point, not wanting to appear dismissive or harsh. But then came her second condition, and it sent another ripple through me. Without hesitation, Christine moved on to her next dream, one that had lived in her heart for decades. She spoke of Hawaii with a kind of wide-eyed nostalgia, describing it as the ultimate destination of peace, beauty, and shared romance. But this wasn't just a casual getaway. She envisioned a full month-long escape, complete with luxury accommodations, curated excursions, and a professional photo shoot to capture the memories. It was a vivid, almost cinematic vision, one she believed should be part of this trial chapter between us. And all I could think was, where was the simplicity, the ease, the natural unfolding of connection? Because this was starting to feel like something else entirely. She spoke with such glee, painting vivid pictures of us walking hand in hand along sun-drenched beaches, soaring over volcanic craters in a helicopter, and laughing as a photographer captured our storybook beginning. For a moment I saw what she saw, a romantic getaway, the kind people dream about in the quieter moments of their lives. And I'll admit it, the idea of Hawaii was tempting. Who wouldn't want to escape to paradise, especially with someone who seemed so hopeful about starting something new? But as she laid out more and more of her vision, the reality began to feel less like a fantasy and more like pressure. Christine expected me to foot the entire bill for this adventure. She quickly assured me that I wouldn't have to lift a finger. "I'll take care of everything," she said with a reassuring smile. "Flights, hotel, activities. You just relax and let me make it perfect." It was hard not to admire her confidence, but at the same time, I was doing silent math in my head. And not just with the dollar signs. This was a month-long vacation, and we'd known each other for less time than it takes to plan a weekend barbecue. What unsettled me more than the cost was the idea of a professional photo shoot. She described it as a symbolic gesture, something to document the beginning of our journey together. And while the sentiment might sound sweet on paper, it felt oddly staged. We hadn't even gotten past coffee and casual conversation, and yet here she was, picturing us wrapped in matching Hawaiian prints, captured in golden hour glow like a couple celebrating their 10-year anniversary. It felt rushed, forced. I listened carefully, trying to keep my expression neutral, but inwardly I felt something inside me harden. This wasn't just about shared goals or responsible money management. This was about control. Christine spoke with a calm, matter-of-fact tone, as if her suggestion were the most logical step two mature adults could take. She cited her experience managing budgets during her nursing career, her meticulous nature, and her belief in structure and planning. And yet, the more she explained, the more it felt like I was being asked to surrender something essential, not just financial freedom, but autonomy. The idea that my retirement income, something I had worked my whole life to build, would be handed over in full, with me receiving only a small monthly allowance, felt deeply unsettling. She framed it as practicality, but it echoed more of a parent-child dynamic than a partnership between equals. I tried to understand her perspective. Maybe this was her way of ensuring stability. Maybe she genuinely believed she could protect our shared future better than I could. But for me, a healthy relationship is about mutual trust, not a ledger sheet managed by one person. What hurt more than the request itself was what it implied, that in order to be with her, I had to prove myself worthy, not through kindness or emotional connection, but through relinquishment of my independence, of my money, of control. This wasn't what I envisioned when I opened myself to the idea of dating again. I didn't want a relationship that came with terms and conditions like a contract. I wanted laughter over coffee, shared moments in the garden, quiet support in the hard times, and comfort in the ordinary. As she continued, I could feel the emotional distance between us growing, even though we sat only feet apart. I wasn't angry, but I was beginning to realize we were not looking for the same kind of love. That knot of unease only tightened as I sat there, silently weighing everything she had just laid out. I wasn't naive. Relationships at this stage of life come with history, baggage, and boundaries. But what Christine was proposing wasn't a boundary. It was a blueprint, one that had little room for negotiation. The allowance comment lingered in my mind like a sharp echo. Not only was it unsettling, it was dehumanizing. I couldn't shake the image of myself needing permission to buy a book or a cup of coffee, or being penalized with chores for spending too much of my own money. It made me feel like a child being managed, not a partner being respected. Still, I tried to remind myself that people express their needs in different ways. Maybe Christine truly believed that structure brought stability, that she was offering clarity, not control. But clarity without mutual consent quickly becomes a command. And what she called structure felt like a slow erosion of my voice in the relationship. At this point, the conversation had turned into something else entirely. I no longer felt like we were two people exploring the possibility of a future together. I felt like I was sitting through a pitch for a role in someone else's life plan, a role I didn't ask for, didn't want, and didn't agree with. And yet, I stayed. Not because I was still hopeful, but because I wanted to fully understand the scope of what I was being asked to step into. If nothing else, I owed myself that clarity. It was becoming crystal clear that Christine and I were not just misaligned. We were fundamentally incompatible. What she saw as reasonable, I saw as restrictive. What she viewed as commitment, I viewed as control. By the end of her explanation, I wasn't even disappointed anymore. I was just certain. This wasn't the future I wanted. I couldn't help but feel a sense of resignation wash over me. Christine had just presented her final demand, and it hit me hard. At first, I tried to be empathetic, considering her perspective, the need for personal space, especially after so many years of living alone. But after everything else she had outlined, this final condition felt like the nail in the coffin. It was as though I was being asked to enter into a partnership on her terms alone, without any flexibility, without any true collaboration or shared goals. The separate bedrooms idea, while not unheard of, felt almost symbolic at this point. Was this about independence, or was it about distance, emotional and physical? I couldn't tell anymore. What I did know was that this final condition didn't reflect a desire for intimacy or connection. It reflected a need for control, a way to maintain power over the relationship dynamic. It felt more like a series of boundaries built around herself than an invitation to build something together. And there it was. Every condition, every expectation had been about what she needed, what she wanted. The relationship, in her view, wasn't a mutual partnership of growth, trust, and shared experience. It was an arrangement, one where I was expected to prove my worth through grand gestures, financial sacrifice, and a total surrender of my autonomy. A partnership built on transactional terms. By now, I was done. The idea of continuing this conversation, let alone agreeing to any part of her proposal, felt utterly alien to me. I could feel my thoughts crystallizing into a firm resolution. With all the kindness I could muster, I smiled and politely said, "Christine, I appreciate your honesty, but I think we're looking for very different things. I don't think this is the right fit for me." Her face faltered, but she quickly masked it with a smile and nodded, as if she had been prepared for my response. We exchanged a few more polite words, and I excused myself from the meeting, thankful it was over. Walking out of the cafe, I felt an odd mix of relief and sadness. I was disappointed, sure, but I also felt liberated. This experience reminded me that relationships, true relationships, should be about mutual respect, compromise, and shared dreams, not demands and conditions. As I stepped out into the Florida sunshine, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to settle for anything less than the kind of connection I knew I deserved. As I walked away from the meeting, I felt a sense of finality settle in. The air outside seemed fresher, and the weight on my shoulders lightened just a little. I had entered that cafe hoping for a meaningful connection, a chance at something real and lasting. Instead, I found myself facing a version of a relationship that felt more like a transaction than a partnership. Reflecting on it, I realized that my desire for peace and companionship was still intact. What I sought was someone who valued the same things I did: simple joys, shared experiences, and a genuine connection built over time, not a checklist of expectations. Christine's conditions, though likely shaped by her past, were far from what I envisioned, and that was okay. We were simply not on the same page. Walking away felt like a small victory in itself. It reminded me that I didn't have to settle for something that didn't align with my values. Relationships, at their core, should feel like a mutual exchange of trust and respect, not an arrangement where one person holds all the cards. There was no rush. I had time, and I would wait for a connection that truly resonated with who I was and what I wanted. As I made my way to the next part of my day, I couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of hope. The right relationship, built on a foundation of respect, kindness, and shared dreams, was still out there waiting for me. I just had to keep believing in it. As I sat on my porch sipping my tea, I let the warmth of the sun wash over me, grounding me in the present moment. The conversation with Christine had stirred a lot of emotions, feelings of confusion, frustration, and even a hint of regret for having hoped for something different. But as the hours passed, the clarity I sought began to emerge. It wasn't just about walking away from someone whose expectations didn't align with mine. It was about staying true to myself. I thought about the kind of relationship I truly wanted, one that was based on genuine connection, mutual respect, and a gradual building of trust, not one that required me to prove my worth through conditions or financial contributions. While Christine might have her reasons for her demands, I knew deep down that I could never thrive in an environment that felt more like a contract than a partnership. The more I reflected, the more I realized that walking away wasn't a failure. It was an act of self-respect. I wasn't giving up on love. I was simply refusing to settle for a situation that didn't honor the values I held dear. Sometimes it's easier to stay in a situation just for the sake of not being alone, but that's not the path to fulfillment. True connection comes from shared values and an organic bond, not from expectations that feel out of place. I smiled to myself, realizing that being on my own wasn't a burden. It was an opportunity. It was an opportunity to continue growing, to remain open to the right kind of connection, and to live a life that felt authentic. If I was going to share my life with someone, I wanted it to be with someone who was as committed to building something real and meaningful as I was. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a soft golden hue over the yard. In that quiet moment, I felt content. I was okay. And maybe, just maybe, the right person was out there, waiting for the same kind of love and understanding I was. Until then, I'd continue living my life, trusting that the right relationship would come when the time was right. In the days that followed, as I continued to reflect on my experience with Christine, I realized how much dating later in life brings with it both challenges and opportunities for growth. We carry the weight of past relationships, lessons learned, mistakes made, and sometimes emotional baggage we've yet to fully unpack. But with each step forward, it's important to remember that we have the wisdom and clarity to make decisions that are aligned with our values. The desire for security, both emotional and financial, is understandable, especially after experiencing hurt or disappointment in the past. But genuine connections, the kind that truly matter, can't be built on conditions or transactions. They're formed in moments of vulnerability, mutual support, and the understanding that both people are willing to meet each other halfway, with no expectation of proving themselves through grand gestures or financial contributions. I realize that relationships should feel like a partnership, not a business arrangement. As we get older, it's even more crucial to stay true to what brings us peace and joy, because time becomes all the more precious. It's easy to feel pressured to make it work just for the sake of companionship. But I believe it's far better to wait for a connection that truly honors who you are. For anyone navigating relationships at this stage of life, my advice is simple. Know your worth and never lose sight of the values that matter most to you. Trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. And most importantly, never settle for less than what will truly bring you happiness and fulfillment. Life is too short to compromise on the things that give it meaning. At the end of the day, peace of mind and genuine connection are priceless. So if you're on a similar journey, take a moment to appreciate the love and respect you deserve. It may take time, but it will be worth the wait.